Hi folks, FloridaMan here. Today I'm devoting a video to going over one of the most commonly discussed alliances in the game of diplomacy, the Western Triple. Out of all the alliances that involve more than two players, this one is easily the one that I've discussed or seen discussed or actually observed play out most often. For that reason, I think it's a matter of strategic interest to the viewers of this channel how this alliance works, what the pros and cons of the alliance are, how long it typically lasts, and whom it benefits most in execution. The Western Triple works by completely avoiding the usual early conflict between England, France, and Germany in the West, in favor of the three engaging in an alliance against all of the Eastern powers. In theory, this means that they negotiate who gets Belgium and Holland and Sweden, and then Germany becomes a land force that is sent to go and attack Russia in Warsaw before Russia has really become a stable or significant power. England becomes a naval and marine force that invades Scandinavia and breaks into St. Petersburg, and France uses a grand combined naval and marine force to attack the Mediterranean powers, usually starting with Italy. To function more securely, the alliance frequently DMZs spaces like the English Channel and Burgundy and refrains from convoys of English armies into Holland or Belgium in order to avoid the temptation to stab. The pros of the Western Triple are that it has overwhelming force in the early to mid-game, it can be a fairly fast-moving alliance if the players involved all have faith in it early on, and at least in theory, it avoids a conflict in the Western world early on. More on that later. The cons of the Western Triple are that it can be obvious fairly quickly, especially when it's actually rolling along well, that it sparks almost automatic opposition and unity on the other side of the map, and that you're almost certainly setting up a conflict for later, and depending on who you are, that might not be in your interests. Also, it's quite difficult for the alliance to work together, especially in the medium to long term. France and Germany frequently don't work together on the French challenges in the Mediterranean, which could mean French progress will be slow. England and Germany, on the other hand, are fighting for relatively scarcer centers in Scandinavia and Russia, which is fuel for future conflict. What I've observed about this alliance's duration is that, even if it doesn't lead to betrayal immediately, it tends to break down right around when England gets into either St. Petersburg or Moscow, because it's usually a more difficult task for England to grow beyond those centers. The English supply centers are being stretched out, and the German homeland will be looking tempting for England, since they're much closer and probably a softer target than the remainder of the East. Even if England is staunchly loyal, Germany will be getting nervous about the fact that English units are all around Germany now. England has units in Scandinavia, to the north of Germany, in the English homeland, to the west of Germany, and in Russia, to Germany's east. Germany is very likely to get nervous about the fact that the English distribution of forces looks an awful lot like a giant mouth, and Germany itself looks like the fruit that that mouth is about to eat. Even in the unlikely event that Germany was content to trust in England's tender mercies, and England was genuinely willing to continue hammering away at Armenia and Romania with German assistance, rather than taking the much shorter trip into the Rhineland, we also have to grapple with the fact that there's a third person in this alliance, France, and if there's an alliance between three people, two of them will be closer to each other than they are to the third one, and that third person will either wind up trying to break them up, or stabbing them, or being stabbed. So there's a time limit on French cooperation, just as there's a time limit on everything else with the Western Triple. Unlike Germany and England, France usually doesn't get very much military assistance out of the Triple relative to his neighbors. What that means is that France can end up blocked up in the Mediterranean, unable to advance there past a certain point, and then France is under time pressure to betray one of his early allies before they become strong enough to adequately defend against that potential betrayal. In short, I find it very rare that the Western Triple lasts through the whole game. It's much more common for one or two of the three to stab one of their comrades before the East is even halfway subdued. As for the winners and losers of the Western Triple, the biggest loser if the alliance gets off the ground is typically Russia. Even if the alliance gets betrayed after a few years, the damage that tends to be done to Russia if the alliance is cohesive for the first few years is typically traumatic enough that Russia will not recover sufficiently to become a great power again, assuming Russia even survives. The second biggest loser is usually Italy, who gets directly attacked by the full force of France and possibly a German army, well before Italy would typically have to worry about that. Even if Italy doesn't get destroyed, and Italy can frequently survive a couple of years of this, it's still a problem, because it gives Austria or Turkey plenty of time to attack Italy if they choose to do so, and it certainly doesn't allow Italy much opportunity for early growth. The next biggest loser in my experience is usually Germany. Most of the time, if a Western Triple happens, Germany is the one who gets stabbed, ending the alliance. In my experience. England breaks into one or two of the centers that they had acquired together, and suddenly Germany has lost virtually all of its gains and is in a belated fight for its life against former allies. Even if France takes the German side, there's no particular likelihood that Germany recovers from this. Austria or Russia are entirely likely to help Germany along toward death, assuming that they're able to. The biggest winner of the Western Triple is whoever Russia was attacking in 1901, because that power gets a second chance at life. That typically means Austria or sometimes Turkey, who now have an advantage against Russia. The chaos that the Triple unleashes in the East frequently allows for a change in circumstances for whoever lost when initial alliances shook out over there. The second biggest winner is England, who avoided the very frequent Franco-German alliance in the early game and probably completely locked up the north, meaning that England took St. Petersburg. If England took St. Petersburg, and Russia's northern fleet is destroyed, it's now pretty close to impossible for England to be dislodged from the Scandinavian centers. If England then stabbed Germany, then England might well be on the road to solo, especially if France is on board with England. The next biggest winner is probably France, who is at least more likely to benefit from the alliance than Germany, and does benefit from the early peace to the extent that France successfully expanded into the Mediterranean. I hope you can see the ups and downs of this alliance now, the risks and the rewards. I typically don't want to engage in a Western Triple if I am Germany, because Germany risks becoming the meat in an English and French sandwich, or getting stabbed by England at any time. I think Germany should probably only agree to this if the alternative is being attacked by England and France together, or England and Russia together. If I'm France, I'm certainly willing to consider the alliance, but it's mainly valuable if I'm getting Belgium in exchange for joining, or if I'm getting Germany to move into Tyrolia to help me with Italy early on, or if England and Germany were otherwise going to attack me early on. As for England, I'm coming around to the idea that it's actually a fairly ideal situation for England. The English player gets to attack Russia early on, and win some easy victories before England has to deal with fighting France or Germany. The main problem here is that France and Germany can say that they're pulling a triple, and then quickly turn on England once England begins committing forces against Russia. Alternatively, they could decide, because they know the triple is unbalanced, that they're turning on England as soon as England has any meaningful success. For these reasons, although I think the triple is an interesting alliance, I consider it a flawed one as well. It's risky for all of the parties involved, and in the end, the one who usually benefits most from it is England. But because everyone knows that, England might be safer just making a firm alliance with either France or Germany. I've also often found that the three players agree to a triple, only for two of them to then proceed to turn on the third person, having lowered that person's guard with the proposal. So, the Western Triple is fraught with risk, in my mind. Although, when it succeeds, for whichever two of the partners survive, it can be worthwhile. I hope you've enjoyed this strategic overview and found it to be of some value. If so, I hope you'll like, subscribe, and check out more FloridaMan diplomacy videos. Until next time, FloridaMan out.